Hello friends, thank you for watching this video. I am Mohamad and I'll be showing you today how to add a JWT token authentication to our ASP.NET Core REST API. Some of the topics we'll cover are registration, login, as well as we'll be explaining what are JWTs, Json Web Tokens, and what is bearer token. Please like and subscribe if you like this video. We will be basing our current work on our previous to-do REST API application that we have created in our last video. Links to the video will be in the description and on the upper right hand side corner. You can follow along either by watching that video and building the application step by step with me, or you can get the latest source code from GitHub. The link for the source code will also be in the description down below. Before we start, I will be explaining quickly how JWT token works and what's the benefit of having them and how do they differ from normal authentication. So right now we will be explaining how does JWT works and what's the main benefit of it. So previously, before JWT, so let's say we had a server. And we had different users which are trying to utilize the authentication service within that server. The main thing that was happening here, the server was handling sessions, and those sessions were stored within the server, and the main way that the users were knowing that within every user we used to have cookies, and those cookies used to match with that session on the server. So it was a pretty straightforward mechanism if we had only one server. But the problem arises when we have different servers. So let's say this server that we have here only able to serve 1000 users. So these are 1000 users. So what happens if we have, for example, 2000 users? So we had to initiate a new server. And those users using a load balancer, let's organize this better. So we'll have here like a load balancer, which all of the requests they're gonna come towards to. So these requests will stop from here. Let's make this a bit better. Okay, so here we'll have, for example, a load balancer, and all of the requests will go here. And then this load balancer will distribute the traffic on these two servers. So what happens to the sessions that they were only available on this server? If my cookies, if the user's cookie comes to the load balancer and this load balancer redirects to the main server, the user will be still logged in. But if, for example, this user here goes to the load balancer and goes to the other server, since this server here doesn't have any idea about this session that exists within the first server, this user is gonna be logged out. So this user is gonna be logged out because the connection is gonna go through the load balancer and then it's gonna go towards this server, which we can see here there is no session information. So this means that this user is gonna be signed out. So the solution for that was to create like a Redis cache. This is one of the solutions actually. It was to have like a certain cache layer somewhere here, and this cache layer, we'll call it Redis as an example of a cache service, stores the sessions here. And then this cache, it will be responsible to communicate with the server in order to keep the user authentication. This was a pretty expensive setup and a bit complicated to do. So what was the solution? So the solution was to make everything stateless. By making it stateless mean that the server by itself will not keep any sessions saved within its memory. So this is a new server, for example, here. This is another server here. And let's say this is a third server here. And we have one user and a second user and a third user. So what happened if this first user authenticate, what happens if this first user try to authenticate with this server using JWT. The request is gonna go first. The request is gonna go to this server. The server is gonna authenticate. It could be using an identity provider. It could be using different types of mechanism. But for the simplest form, let's say it's gonna just use a shared identity provider. We could identity provider. And this identity provider is going to return back to the server, and we're going to provide the user here a JWT token, which we're going to be using. So this JWT token basically consists of the user information, user info, could be email and ID, for example. The second thing it's going to be consisting of is the token by itself, which is going to be encrypted, and the information, which is gonna be type of encryption, for example. So once this token is back to the user and the user wants to do any action against the server, the user here will not need to the server here will not to keep any track of any of the sessions that the user happened. So let's say this first server here had hit the 1000 user limit mark. So after all of these users, all of these requests are coming in, and we have another load balancer which is going to be here, for example, which is going to be routing all of that traffic. This user here, once its new request coming in and hits the load balancer was going to send it to a new server, new instance of the server, new instance. And as we mentioned before, we are not saving any type of sessions, and all of the information is already within the JWT token that we have here. So the user will send the JWT token back to the new instance. The new instance will decrypt it using the key, secret key that we have, and then it will verify the user, and then using the identity provider, and if everything goes well, it will perform the action, and then it will return back to the user the response. So what we can see from this is the server here will have less load to do because they are not keeping any sessions. In case of scaling up or scaling down, we're not going to be losing any sessions because all of this architecture is stateless. So it means that the servers here, the 1, 2, 3 servers or any number of servers, are not storing any sessions within that server itself. All of the sessions are stored within this JWT tokens, which is handled by which is returned back to the user for any request that they do. In a simple form, so let's compare between the first one and the second one. So on the first one here, we can see within this cache layer that we have here, and those sessions that the server use in order for us to authenticate every user, the server must keep in memory how many sessions it have, how many users it have at the same time, what are their credentials, and how the cookies, what's the cookies information, and if the cookie is sending back, for example, any keys, how they are gonna be able to decrypt them. So all of these information are running at the same time at the server memory, and it's gonna cost, on top of not able to directly move up or scale up the server or scale down the server. It's gonna keep the server process running at a way more higher rate than if we are using a stateless architecture like the JWT, where basically all of the server will not be responsible for storing any information in the memory. Basically, it's just gonna take that token that we have decrypt it, and see if it's actually valid, and then do the request or do the process or the perform the request that the user have asked for. So basically, this is a small summary of how JWT token works. As just to end it up, so basically the way JWT system work in our example at this moment in time. So this is a user, and we have this server here. This is a database, so this is a server, for example. So the user send the response to the server, which is send the request, which is going to be the username and a password. So username and a password, and then the server will return back to the user a JWT token, and then every request that the user have to make, this JWT token has to be within the header. So let's say we have a new request coming in, within this it has to be a JWT. Another request going in, JWT has to be in the header. Another request, for example, coming in as well, JWT has to be in. So if in case a user makes a request without a JWT, the user will get something called a 401 or a 403 unauthorized, because since the server does not know which person who sent this request, and the information they are accessing needs to be from a logged in user, the server will return a 401 or 403. Finally, just to do a quick summary of the HTTP code that the API might return. So if a user is unauthorized, so we'll say unauthorized, they will get either, for example, a 401 or a 403. If the user, for example, if the server return any error, will get 500XX. So it could be 501, 502, 503, depending on the error. If something is not found, so not found, the server will return a 404. If there's an internal redirection issue, or some of the properties are not found, so let's put not found, redirection issue is going to return a 302 plus XX. So it depends. If something is processed successfully, success will get a 200. If the user, for example, try to add a record and the record is added correctly, so adding a record, the server will return a 201. If, for example, we try to update, so update record, the server should return a 204, no content. These are like a small part of the HTTP response that the server return for us when using any type of REST API, APIs. I hope this clarifies JWTs and how stateless work. If you have any question, please add it down in the comments down below. Once we have our code ready, let's get started. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to install some packages in order for us to utilize authentication. In order for us to do that, we need to add some packages. So the first package we're going to be adding is .NET add package Microsoft .asp net core .authentication .jwt bearer. It will take a few seconds. Perfect. Now the second one is .NET add package Microsoft .asp net core .identity .entity framework core. This will also take a few seconds to be installed. Perfect. So once this is done, we can verify it by going to our to-do.cs proj, and we can see the two packages are installed successfully, which is great. So the next step is we need to start by configuring our JWT. How do we do that? So for us to do that, we'll go to the app settings.json, and we can start by adding a new configuration. We'll call it Jwt Config, and we start by adding the secrets that we need. The secrets that we're going to be adding here is the secret that's going to be encrypting our JWT tokens before sending them back to our clients. So this is really important that we need to keep the secret safe. The secret needs to be a string character of a string of 32 characters. So in order for us, we can just input any secrets. For example, for me, I'm gonna just put generate any random secret online. I'm gonna put the link for this website. So all we need to do is just specify that we need it 32, and I'll click on generate, and it will generate for me any random string of 32 characters. I can just copy it and I'll paste it here. Perfect. So now this is our JWT token secret. Once we do that, the next step for us is to add a new configuration folder, and then within that configuration folder we add a class named Jwt Config. So within our root directory we create a new folder. We'll call it configuration, and within that folder we create a class. We'll call it Jwt Config. Basically this class is going to be mapping our application settings in order for us to reference it within our startup class. So it's going to have only one attribute of type string, and it's going to be called secret. Great. Now we need to update our startup class. Inside our configure services, within our startup class, we need to define and we need to read that configuration for the JWT token. So how do we do that? As simple as we can do it at the first line. We'll add services .configure, and we'll define the class that we have just added, and we'll use the configuration methods .get settings, get section, and we'll specify which section we want to get, which is going to be JWT config. And let's fix the references that we have. So basically this line here is going to be reading the configuration that we have directly. Okay, there's a typo here, I apologize. So basically this line here is going to be reading the configuration directly from our app settings, and it's going to be mapping it. So how does it do that? As you can see here, we have Jwt config, and within that we have the key which is going to be secret. And within our configuration folder we have a class with the same architecture. So the class name is Jwt Config, and it has a string inside of it called secret. So once we add our service.configure for Jwt Config, this service here is going to go through the app settings and it's going to look for the same configuration as we have defined here. So basically it's going to just look for it. If it's find it, it's going to map it to the same variables that we have, and it's going to automatically link it for us, and it's going to be available for us whenever we're going to use it within the application. This is a feature that has been introduced within the .NET 3.1. So after that, the IOC of ASP.NET will be allowing us to read the secret anywhere within the application. The next step is by adding the configuration and for the authentication in our startup class. So inside our configure service method we need to add the following. After the add-db context, we need to add the authentication. So we'll put services dot add authentication. We'll create the options that we need. Let's close this down. Okay, so the first option is we're going to be defining the authentication schema that we want. So options.default authentication schema. We're going to be utilizing the JWT bearer defaults dot authentication scheme. Let's fix the references for this. Perfect. The second thing is we're going to be using the defining the default scheme. So in case the first one fails, we need to define the second one. which is gonna be the same thing, so we can just copy paste it. And the third one is gonna be the default challenge scheme options dot the default challenge scheme, and it's gonna be the same thing. Okay, great. Once we add that, now we need to add our JWT token configuration. So we'll put dot add JWT bearer. We'll define the option for JWT. So the first thing is we're gonna be defining the key that we're gonna be using, and that key is gonna be the secret that we have here. So first of all, let's put var key equal. We need to encode it. We need to have it in byte array. So in order for us to do that, we'll put encoding dot ASCII to dot get bytes configuration, and within that configuration we'll put JWT config colon secret, and let's fix the references. Perfect. So now we have our key read directly from the configuration. The next step is to start actually adding the settings that we want for our JWT token. So JWT.save token, it's going to be true. JWT.token validation. So basically here we're going to be defining the different configuration that our JWT will have. So it's going to be new token validation context, token validation parameters, token validation, let's remove these, and let's fix the, okay, we can, and then we'll put the configuration that we want, which is gonna be validate issuer signing key. I wonder why autocomplete is not working. Let's see if we can figure it out. Oh, I think we need to fix this reference. Let's see. Yeah, let's take this and let's add the using statement for it. Using, okay, now it should automatically work. Okay, great. So now let's continue. So first of all, we added the validate issuer signing key. So basically this will validate the third part of our JWT token using the secret that we have added within our app setting, and it will verify that we have generated this JWT token. So just for a reference, a JWT token is composed of 3 sections, and the last part of that token is basically encrypted. And that encrypted part, when we put here validate issuer signing token, this encryption, this value here, or this option that we have added, will validate that that third part has been configured by us or encrypted by us. So the second part is we're going to be defining the signing key, which is going to be doing all of the encryption for us. So it's going to be issuer signing key, and we're going to be utilizing a new symmetric security key, and we're going to be passing that key that we have defined earlier. So that key here that we have defined here on line 48, this key is going to be used in order for us to encrypt all of our JWT tokens. So the next step is validate issuer. For the time being and for the purpose of this video, we're going to put them at false, but in a video down the road, we're going to be updating them and utilizing all of these. So validate audience, we're going to put also as false. validate lifetime. This is gonna be true. And lastly, require expiration time is equal false, because we don't want it really to expire while we are testing it. Once we want to deploy it, we can change this validation. Perfect. So just to do a quick summary, the first thing that we have added our default authentication. We have defined all of the schemes that we want that's gonna be responsible for utilizing the JWT token. After that, we started by adding the configuration for our JWT bearer token, specifying which key is going to be using for encryption, and then basically giving the validation parameters of how it's going to encrypt that key by itself. After that, we're going to be adding our configuration, basically our identity configuration, in order for us to utilize the different identity service that ASP.NET provide. So in order for us to do that, we'll go to services.add default identity, add default identity. We're going to be using the identity user, which is going to be built in for us, and then we're going to specify the options that we have. So options, it's going to be a lambda function, so put options dot sign in dot, let's put the require confirmed account equal true, and then lastly we're gonna be adding the identity framework stores. So after that, we're just gonna be simply adding the dot add, if I can type properly, add entity framework stores, and we're gonna be passing our API DB context that we have created in our in the earlier video. Let's fix the references. Okay, so we forgot to add a single package, which is gonna be very easy for us to add, which is gonna be the ASP.NET Core Identity UI. So in order for us to do that, we're just gonna go back to our terminal and type .NET add package Microsoft .ASP.NET core.identity.ui. Perfect, now that's added. I think right now we can fix the references. Great, and now let's add the references for our identity user. And now, perfect. Now let's try to build and run the application, see if everything is running. Let's save first, and let's just type .NET build, and we can see the application is building, and it has given us build succeeded, which is great. So the next step is we need to update our configure function, and within the configure function here, simply what we need to do is we need to add app.use authentication. We just need to refer to the middleware that's going to be utilizing the authentication that we have. Again, let's just .NET build, make sure it's building as it should. Perfect. Now .NET run. Great. So now in order for us to test it, let's just open back Postman and just do minor calls and make sure that everything is working. So let's go to HTTPS localhost 5001 /API / what was it, controllers to do, and let's do the get so we can get everything. So to do send, and we can see that the API is still working and it's returning all of the data that we have saved previously, which is great. So now that we have made sure that our application is running, let's stop it again And now let's go back to our application DB contacts, which is our API DB contacts, and start doing some updates there so we can utilize the identity. So within our data folder, we open the API DB context. The first thing we need to do is we need to change the class that we are inheriting from DB context to identity DB context. Identity DB context. So why did we do that? Since we're going to be utilizing ASP.NET Core identity, the identity must have certain tables existing within the database. And ASP.NET provide us with this functionality simply by inheriting from this class instead of the normal DB context. So in order for us to generate those tables within our database and utilize them, what we need to do is we need to add certain migrations. So going back to our terminal, we just type .NET EF migrations add. We'll add new authentication tables to our API, for example. Press on enter, and this will take a few seconds. It will build the application first and generate the migration script. Perfect. The next step is just put .NET EF database update. So the first one, migrations add, has created all of the scripts, and if you want we can see them here from within the migration folder. We can see that we have 2 new files, and one of them here basically it's creating the identity roles and is creating all of the identity tables. So that was migration as does. But when we do .NET EF database update, it will run all of these migration scripts and it will add them to our database directly. So if we click on enter, first before we do that, let's open DB Beaver and let's check our database, the before and after. So let me just open it up and let's navigate to our application. So it's gonna be SQLite and it's on our desktop. So we'll go desktop, YouTube, and we'll choose our app.db and we open it. Let's test the connection. Perfect. And now let's open it. And once we open it here, we can see that we only have one table at the moment, which is the item table that we're currently using to store all of our to-dos. Once we run this script .NET EF database update, all of the scripts that has been generated right now will be run against our database. And if we open our database again and we refresh those tables, we can see that ASP.NET, by simply just inheriting here from identity DB contacts instead of DB contacts, has created for us all of these tables, which is going to be responsible for handling all of the authentication and authorization on the database side of our application, which is great. So after we do that and we have make sure that our database has been updated, the next step is we'll be setting up our controllers and build our registration process for the user. So inside our controllers folder, we're going to be adding new controllers. We're going to be calling them the Authentication Management Controller. But before we do that, we need to add certain DTOs. DTOs are data transfer objects, which are going to be responsible for sending data from the API and to the API. And these data form that we're going to be utilizing in order to standardize the requests. So first of all, what we need to do is within our application, we'll create a new folder, or what we can do, we can within our configuration folder, let's create a new class, and this new class will call it authResult. And basically this authResult is gonna have 3 parameters. So the first one basically is gonna be the token that we're gonna be generating. The second one is gonna be a boolean, which is gonna be telling if the result is successful or not. So we're gonna call it result, or we can call it a success. And lastly, we're gonna return the list of errors if anything is generated from the API side. So prop list of strings if I can type, apologize, and we'll name it errors. Perfect. So now we have our root class that's gonna be responsible for our DTOs. Now what we need to do is within our models folder, we can add a new folder. We'll call it DTOs. Let's put it all in capital. DTOs, and within that DTO folder we create another folder, and that folder we're gonna be calling them requests. So basically it's gonna be responsible for all of our post request, put request that is gonna be coming to our database, and the other folder that we're gonna be creating is the responses. Let's put this here. So now we have two folders inside our DTOs. Great. So the first DTO that we're gonna be adding is our request. Let's add a new class. We'll call this one user registration DTO. And basically this user registration is only gonna be currently responsible for two things. The first one is gonna be an email. So it's gonna be of type string, and we're gonna call it email. The second one, also of type string, we're gonna be naming it password. And we're just gonna add some certain attributes for both of them. So both of them are gonna be required. And let's copy this. And for the email as well, we need to make sure that it's of email format. So we'll put email here, email address. Perfect. So now we have created our DTO. Basically this object is going to be sent to our API. Now let's send back let's create our response one. So basically within the responses folder, we just create a new class. We'll call it registration response, and enter. And as simple as we're just gonna be inheriting for now all of the auth results class that we created earlier. Auth result, yep. So this one is gonna be basically within the configuration folder. So let's add the using statement, using to do app.configuration auth result. Yes, that's correct. So let's go back to the response and configuration dot. Let's try to build it. Sometimes the IDE takes time to refresh its indexes. Okay, sorry, I have misspelled result. Great. So now let's build again, and it's working. Build succeeded. Great. So the next step is, now we're gonna go to the really exciting part, is to add our new controllers and building those controllers. So first of all, within our controllers folder, we add a new class, and that class we're gonna be calling it auth management controller. This class is gonna be inheriting from the controller base, because basically we're not gonna be utilizing any of the UI stuff that the controller class provides. We're just gonna be inheriting from the base class. Second, we're gonna be defining the route of that class. So it's gonna be as simple as API / we're gonna define give it the controller name, so it will automatically take the controller name, and we're gonna give it the attribute of API controller. So basically this one here is gonna be similar to API / auth management. Great. So once we do that, the next step is basically to utilize our user manager that ASP.NET Identity Provide, and then we're gonna be injecting our JWT configuration as well. So first of all, our user manager, so let's put prop, it's gonna be private, so private read-only user manager, and we're gonna be utilizing the identity user, which is provided for us by default by ASP.NET Identity, and we're gonna call this user manager. And then let's fix the references for these. Okay, great. The next one is we're gonna be utilizing the JWT configure, so private, again read only JWT config, we call it JWT config. So we're gonna be using constructor initialization, and basically the startup class will be responsible to fill all of the dependency injection, because user management is already gonna be defined by this line. The default identity is gonna be responsible to injecting the user management to our classes based on what we need, and the other one is gonna be the JWT config, which is also the startup class. Is gonna be responsible for filling those dependency injection because we have already configured it here. So basically the DI is gonna be all handled by ASP.NET, since we already defined all of the configuration in the startup class. So the next step for us here is just to create a constructor, and within this constructor we just need to again inject the user manager with identity user, and we'll call it user manager. The second one is gonna be our options provider, because we're gonna inherit our options from the startup class, or from the DI dependency from IOC, from the inversion of control that we have. So in order for us to utilize it, we're gonna have to go to with option monitor, and we're gonna provide it which configuration we're gonna use, which is the JWT config, and we're just gonna call it as simple as options monitor, simple naming. And here just let us fix the references and formatting it a bit better. Okay, great. Now all we need to do is as simple as just referring and initializing. So user manager equal user manager, and JWT config is gonna be equal options monitor dot current value, which is basically it's gonna take any value that we have within our app settings and inject it directly to our controller. Perfect. So after that, we're gonna start by creating our action, and this action is gonna be the registration one. So as we know, because we're gonna be registering, so basically we're gonna performing an action, so it's gonna be a post. So the first thing is we need to add an attribute HTTP post. Then we're gonna define the route. So it's gonna be route, and it's gonna be register. Great. Then public async task, since we're gonna be utilizing the async and await keyword, and we're gonna return an iAction result. We're gonna call it register, and this one is gonna take from body, and then we're gonna be utilizing basically the request that we have created earlier, which is user registration DDO, and we're gonna fix the references, and we're gonna call this user registry user. Great. So once we have that, now we need to start adding our functionality. So let's fix those references here for tasks. So the first thing we want to make sure that we have correct is our model. So if this model that we are processing is gonna be valid. So as you can see here, we have added required and email attribute for the email and required for the password. So in order for us to do some kind of validation on this within our action here, what we can do, we just utilize the built-in functionality of a model state that is provided for us. So we'll write the if model state dot is valid, it means that the object or the model that we currently have is valid. It meets all of the requirements that we have, so we can resume working. So we can utilize the model. If not, if the model is failure, what we need to do is we need to return to the user basically a bad request, and let's make it a nice response. So we're gonna be returning a registration. Let's see, what did we call it? Registration response. Let's fix the reference and let's define it. Okay, great. So within this registration response, we're gonna be checking the error list. So errors equal new list of strings, and we'll add the first one, which is going to be invalid payload. Usually we need to give a much more generic error message, but since we are still developing it, I think that's fine for now. Okay, great. And the next thing maybe we can add, let's see, what did we have within our auth results? Successful put false. So let's go back to the controller, and after this one we'll define the success and we'll put it as false. By default it's false, but it's always good to see what the values, put the values manually. So now let's go back if everything works smoothly as we are expecting. So the first thing we need to do, we need to check if this email has already been registered with us or not. So how do we do that? We're going to be utilizing the user manager. So first we declare a variable, we'll call the existing user, await user manager dot, basically we're going to be finding it by an email async, and we're going to just be providing the user dot email. Great. So in case this user is has already an email with us, they cannot basically re-register again with the same email, so we'll utilize it. So if existing user not equal null, it means that the user cannot register, so we're gonna return also another bad request. So we can just copy paste this one and we change the message from the inside, and instead of an invalid payload we can say email already in use, or yeah, because it's already, we're only using it for testing for now, so email already in use. Perfect. So the next step is we have checked if this email exists. The email doesn't exist, so now we need to create it. So how do we do that? So we get a new variable, we'll call it new user equal, basically we define a new identity user, and we're gonna be providing the email, which is set, which is gonna be user.email, as well as the username, which is user.email. We could have updated the request. Tell you what, let's update the request. So within the user registration, let's add a new property string, we'll call it username. So some people would like to have, for example, a username different than their emails, so let's add this option. We'll make it required as well. Okay, great. So now let's go back to our class, and let's, for the username, we'll use the username. Okay, great. So after we have created this user, we need to use the user manager in order for us to add it. So we create a variable, we call it is created equal await underscore user manager dot create async. we're gonna basically passing it the new user, and we're gonna be passing it the password that the user has inputted. Okay, great. Once we do that, now we need to make sure that if is created is succeeded, it means that everything went smoothly, we can resume. Else we need to return a bad request. So what we can do as well, we can put here else, we return a bad request. Let's put unable to create user. And let's maybe add another one, which is gonna be is created, for example, dot errors dot select. Let's select only the messages, and let's fix the reference to system dot link. Okay, great. And then from here we're just gonna utilize the descriptions, and let's put them into .toList. Okay, great. What we can do, we can just move this. We can just basically, instead of this, we can make this here, and we can directly identify the list. Okay, great. So now we have added all of these lists. The error list that's going to be generated. Now let's continue, see what happens once the user has been created successfully. So the first thing is, since we're going to be using the same code over and over again in order for us to generate the JWT token, it makes sense to create a new function which is going to be responsible for that. So after the registration function, let's create a new function. It's going to be private. It's going to return a string which is going to be the JWT token. We'll call this function generate JWT tokens token, and then we're going to just pass the identity user, which is the new user that we have created. Identity user, and we'll call it user. Perfect. So after we have so the first thing we need to do here is we need to start the process of creating those tokens, and in order for us to do that, we need to have something called the JWT security token handler. So first of all, we create a variable, we'll call it JWT token handler equal new JWT security token handler. And now let's fix the references. Perfect. So the JWT will be responsible for creating the JWT token handler. Is going to be the main function which is going to be responsible for generating the tokens, and this handler will take a lot of different configurations which we are going to be defining within this function. So the first thing is going to be getting the security key that we have within our app settings. So in order for us to do that, we'll define a variable called key, and then since it's going to be a byte array as we have saw earlier, so we're going to be utilizing the encoding. I think it's using system, yeah, .text .ascii .get bytes, and then we're just simply going to pass the Jwt Config .secret. Perfect. So once we have that, now we need to define something called the security token descriptor. So the descriptor is how can I explain this? So the descriptor is a class that contains something called the claims, and the claims are basically the information that we define within our JWT in order for us to able to read certain variables from within it. So we can define, for example, the email, the ID of the user, generic type of information that we need to have there, that in order for us to identify what information within this JWT token we contains. So in order for us to utilize this descriptor, we need to get a variable. We'll call it token descriptor, equal new security token descriptor, and let's define the options for this security token, and let's fix the references. So first it's gonna be okay, great. And now the first thing is the subject, and if we can see from the definition of the subject, if it will show, it's gonna be utilizing it doesn't says here, but basically this subject is gonna be utilizing the claims, which is gonna be the information which is gonna be containing inside the JWT. So we're gonna put claims identity new, and okay, great. The first thing, it's gonna be a new claim, and this claim is gonna be the ID, which is gonna be the user ID that we have just created. Why is this claim? Oh, claims with an S. Okay, perfect. So the first thing is, as we said, the ID. The second one gonna be new claim, and we're gonna be using the default one, which is .NET provide for us. JWT registration, register the claims dot email, which is gonna be the user dot email. The second one is gonna be the sub. Third one, sorry, is gonna be the sub. JWT registered claims dot sub. It's gonna be user dot email. And lastly, we're gonna be adding the GTI. So new claim JWT registered claims.jti. So what is the JTI? The JTI is an ID that we're gonna be using in order to utilize the refresh token functionality that JWT support. If you remember, within the startup class, when we have defined our JWT tokens, first let's finish this and then we can explain what a JTI does. So gwt.new gwt, it's gonna be a type of string, so we'll put type to string, and we close it down. Let's fix the reference. Okay, great. So let's go back to the startup class. And within the configuration here, we said require expiration time, and we set false. And this is only because we're using it for development. But when we're actually using it for production level application, we shouldn't do that. Every JWT token that we generate should have a certain time period before it expires. And once, for example, once the user log in for the first time or registered for the first time, they're gonna be getting their token directly from the API. Another field which is going to be sent back from the API is something called the refresh token. So, and it's going to be the timestamp. So how long does this token actually last? So let's say the token lasts 1 hour. So once the 1 hour has passed and and the user is still using our API, what happened? We need with this functionality, we're going to be adding it in a later video, but let me explain it from now so we understand why did we add that JTI here. So once we that token expire and we still want to use it, we have to do another call to the API in order for us to get a new authorization token or a new JWT token. But how are we gonna get this? Just sending the old token is not gonna be enough. So we're gonna send the old token. We're gonna be sending the refresh token, which is a certain type of keys that we're gonna have in order for us to allow us to generate a new JWT token, as well as we're going to be sending a GTI token, which is going to be a unique ID that we're going to be utilizing in order to generate for that user a new token. And basically from that we can create certain type of consistency of the tokens that user has generated. So this is why we have added the JTI here. So after we define the claims now within the subject, the next step is we're going to define the expiry, and we're going to give it here, for example, let's give it 6 hours, let's say .utc, because it's the best way to add time is UTC, so we don't utilize certain time zones. Add hours, and we'll add 6 hours before it expires. And the last thing is we're going to be adding the signing credential. The signing credential here define what type of algorithm that we are going to be using in order for us to encrypt this token. So we put signing credentials equal new signing credentials. It's going to be new symmetric security key, and we're going to be passing the key that we have got, and then we're going to be defining what type of algorithm. I think for this, what we're gonna be using is let's say security algorithms dot hatch MCA. Let's use the 256 signature 256. Perfect. So once we have that, the next step after we have the descriptor is to actually prepare the token to be created based on that descriptor. So we have, let's say, a new variable, we'll call it token, and we're going to be utilizing the JWT token handler that we have initialized before, and then we have to utilize the create token, and we're going to pass a token descriptor which contain all of the information of how the token is going to be created. Then we're going to actually have the JWT token. So far, JWT token equal JWT token handler, JWT token handler dot as simple as write token, and we're gonna pass the token that has been created earlier, because here this function, what's gonna return for us is gonna return for us a security token, and this security token needs to be written because this security token, in order for us to handle it, we need it in a string, so we need to utilize the JWT token handler write token, so we can generate an actual string that we can utilize. After we do that, all we need to do is we just need to return it. So WT token, and now once we have this, we can actually go back to our registration, and yes, here within our registration function, after everything is succeeded, let's generate it. So it's gonna require us the new user, and this function is gonna give us the new JWT token. So var, we'll call it JWT token equal perfect. So now that we have generated our JWT token, the next step is just return it to the user. So how do we do that? We return it in an OK, which is gonna be a 200 response, and we're gonna put the new registration response, and basically it's gonna be, there won't be any errors, it's gonna be success equal true, and the token is gonna be equal to JWT token, and that's it. So within this function here, basically let's do a quick summary of what we did. The first thing is we have added the attributes. It's going to be a post. We define the route for that function, and then we have defined the registration request, so how our the registration DTO, and the first thing we did is we said that if this registration DTO is going to meet the requirement based on the valid model state, and then we checked if this user exists or not, and if it does exist, we're going to return back a bad request with a message email already in use. If that email did not exist, we just have to create a new user. We have to create an email as well as a username, and then we created the user manager, and if everything goes well, we're gonna utilize the generate JWT token function. And as you can see here, within the JWT token function, we're gonna be utilizing the token handler, and then we're gonna be getting the secret that we have created in order for us to encrypt using the HMAC SH8256. And then we're defining the token descriptor, which is gonna have all of the information that we want for the token. And then we're gonna be utilizing the token handler to generate this token, and then we return it back to the user with the registration response, which is great. Once we did all of that, I think now it's we can test this functionality with Postman. So first let's build it. And we can see the application built successfully. The next step is let's run it. Perfect, the application is running. Now let's open Postman. And let's, first of all, let's create a post. It's gonna be similar to this. Instead of to do, it's gonna be auth management. And it's gonna be a register. And it's gonna take a body. And this body is gonna be of type row, and it's gonna be JSON. So let's define it. So it's gonna take, as we said, a username. Let's make the username similar to the email for now. It's gonna call it Mohamad@email.com. It's gonna take an email. It's gonna be the same thing. It's gonna call it Mohamad@email.com. And it's gonna have a password. Let's put it as password 111222333 exclamation mark. And let's try it out. Send. Perfect. So now we can see that this JSON object, which is basically a representation of our user registration DTO, is sent, containing all of the information that we have here. And then after it went through the registration process, we have got a token at the end of it, which is great. Perfect. So now we have tested it and we make sure that it's working. The next step for us is to have a login functionality. So how do we do that? It's going to be very simple, simpler than the registration form. So after the registration function, let's create a new action. And within this new action, it's going to be also an HTTP post. Let's define the route. The route is going to be a login. And let's define the actual action. It's going to be public, async, task, action result, login. And we're going to utilize the from body. And let's create a new request. Do we have? No, we didn't. So let's create it. We're going to call it user login request. Basically, it's going to be the same, almost the same thing that we have from the registration, except the username. So let's take this and let's create a new class within the request, new class. And it's going to contain string, we'll call it email. And it's going to contain the password as well. And the password is going to be required. Let's fix the references. The email is also going to be required, and let's make it email address. Okay, great. So now let's go back to our controller and let's also do the same thing. I'm gonna copy this. No need for copying. So let's do it again. If model state dot is valid. Well, I'm gonna copy the error message from here, which is fine. Let's copy it and let's add it here because basically it's an invalid payload. And the first thing we're gonna do after we make sure that our model is Valid, we're gonna just check if the user exists. So var call it existing user equal await underscore user manager dot find by email async, and we're just gonna pass it user dot email. So in case the user doesn't exist, then we're gonna have an error. So if existing user equal null, we're gonna return a bad request, and within this bad request we're gonna say that we don't want to give a lot of information of what's going on, but we can just say as an invalid login request. Okay, let's fix this layout a bit. Okay, nice. So the next step is we made sure that this email exists. Now we need to actually log in this user, and we need to verify that the password that they have provided is a valid password. So let's get a variable, we call it is correct, or yeah, is correct, it's fine for now, equal await underscore user manager dot, luckily we have a function called check password async, which is provided for us for free from ASP.NET Core Identity. We'll pass it the existing user as well as the user dot password from the model. Oh, I called it password, so that's interesting. Let's fix it. Perfect. And here let's fix this. Okay, great. So now we need to check. So if not correct is correct, if not true, we need to return an error telling the user that the registration has failed. We'll kinda give it the same message. Else it's gonna be as simple as just generating another token. So var, we're gonna call it JWT token. We're gonna utilize the function that we have created earlier, which is gonna be named, I think we named it generate JWT token, which is correct, and we're gonna send it the user, which is gonna be existing user. And finally we're just gonna return the same message as the registration, which is gonna be here, return okay, which is gonna be a 200 HTTP code, new registration response, and this registration response basically gonna return a token and a success. So success equal true, and token equal JWT token. Perfect. So now this basically finalize our auth management controller, and now let's try it out to see if it's working. Let's stop the application, let's build it again, .NET build, see if it actually built successfully. Perfect. Now let's run it. Great. Now let's test it again in Postman. So this is our previous body, so let's just take the email and the password. So let's copy this and open a new one. We'll go to body, let's paste it here, and let's type it JSON and remove the username because we don't need it for the login. Let's take the same URL and update it to login and change get to post. And now if everything goes smoothly, we should get a JWT token using the same username and password, email and password, sorry. So let's click send, and voila, we can see that a token has been generated for us successfully, and the success is true using when we logged in perfectly. So now let's actually verify if this authorization work with an actual controller. So let's go back to the to-do controller. Before we do anything, right now, before adding, without any authentication, if we do get, we can see all of the to-dos that we have, which is the behavior that we expect. But now we don't want anyone to get them, only if they are registered. So how do we do that? So within the attributes, we'll add the authorized attribute. Let's fix the reference. And within the authorized attribute, we need to tell it which schema it needs to follow to authenticate. And since we're going to be using JWT, we need to put the JWT bearer default schema. So we're going to put authentication schemes equal JWT bearer defaults dot authentication scheme. I think let's fix the references here. Perfect. So right now, let's stop the application and run it again. Right now, if we there's an error. What's the error? Let's see. It says in the to-do controller JWT bearers default. JWT bearers default authentication scheme. Let's try again. Okay, perfect. Maybe I haven't saved it the time before that. Now, the expected behavior right now, if I open Postman without adding anything, if I click on send, I should get a 401 or a 403 unauthorized because I didn't send my JWT token with that request. So let's try it. So send, perfect. I got a 401 unauthorized because I haven't sent my token with it. So if I want to send my token with it, I can go to headers, and within the key I add authorization, and here I can type bearer token because this is what I generated, and I can just paste this token that I have here, and let's go back here and add it. Perfect. And if I click on send now, I get all of the requests because I have passed the bearer token, which gonna tell the controller that okay, this request has the right authorization, which means that this request is from a signed in user, which allow the information to be returned back to the client, which is great. So basically, this action right here finalize our JWT token implementation within our registration. This is only the first part of authorization, so there's a different part that we can add, which is the refresh token, as we mentioned before, adding more control, adding roles and permissions, a lot of stuff that we can add. So if you're interested in any of those, please leave a comment down below, and we'll pick a topic to continue. But for the time being, I think the next video will be about how to generate a refresh token and how we can allow the client to automatically change their tokens whenever one of them expired. And we can add more controllers in order to explore different types of permissions with those JWT tokens. Thank you for watching, and please like, share and subscribe to the channel. One more thing, all of the source code will be available in the description down below, and all of the links for different types of explanation, what is JWT, what's bearer token, will be also linked in the description down below.